Greetings, everyone. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
It's our News Watch unit. It's also our All English unit. So, again, we're going to be speaking totally in English here. Not that we don't usually. It's usually the Chinese teacher who comes in and speaks Chinese, not us. We're just not inviting the Chinese teacher today so the teacher can have the day off. So, we're going to be speaking entirely in English. And yes, it's our News Watch, and we've got a couple of interesting stories here. One is about an 8-year-old boy who wrote a Christmas story that kind of became popular. It's kind of special in how that became popular. And then the other one is about a jail-themed restaurant. How would you like to go to jail in order to have a meal?
No, thank you. I'm perfectly happy to stay away from jails for the rest of my life. But it's an interesting idea if you're looking for a themed restaurant. Those are kind of popular these days. We had one that was who's the little character from Japan that has no mouth and
Doraemon, is that it?
No, the kitty. Hello Kitty.
Hello Kitty. Okay.
Hello Kitty restaurant. There was a toilet restaurant at one point.
Yep, up in Shilin, yep.
That was weird. But they're kind of fun just to go once. Unless they have really good food, and then I'd go again. But they're usually more for entertainment. And then this cute story about an 8-year-old who wrote a story that's become a hit. It's pretty young to be writing a story by yourself. So we're going to learn a little bit more about him and his story. But first, guys, we're going to read through today's 2 news stories, and they have different headlines, of course. After devoting 2 years to writing, Idahoan second grader Dylan Helbig snuck his creation about a Christmas adventure onto a library shelf, and people have been borrowing it ever since. The illustrated book titled The Adventures of Dylan Helbig's Christmas by Dylan Helbig himself, as written on the cover, was scrawled into an 81-page hardbound notebook. It's a story with elements of time travel, fantasy, and historical fiction. Wanting to share his story with others, he placed the book on a library shelf with other children's picture books. Later, Dylan's mother called the library to ask if the book had been found by anyone. To her astonishment, the library staff had read the book and established that it complied with their library selection criteria. They began loaning it out like any other book in their collection. Earlier this year, Dylan became the first recipient of the Houdini Award for Best Young Novelist, an award devised by the library just for him. His book went on to inspire other children to write their own stories.
Jail-themed restaurant raises funds to help inmates. 2 Iranian ex-prisoners have opened a successful restaurant with an interesting theme. Called Cell 16, the restaurant looks like a jail, complete with jail cells and prison uniforms. The restaurant helps raise money for convicts who are stuck in prison for unpaid debts. In Iran, the laws are harsh on people who write bad checks or can't pay back bank loans. People are thrown in jail until the money can be repaid. This was the story of Benjamin Nakat and Arman Alizadeh, 2 men who became friends on their way to jail for unpaid debts. It was in prison that they hatched the idea to create a jail-themed restaurant. They have launched campaigns to raise funds for inmates drowning in debt. A part of the restaurant's proceeds is also used to help set prisoners free. They have their own criteria for choosing who gets priority, such as men with wives and families. Thanks in part to word of mouth on social media, the restaurant has been a success. Last year, it donated $130 million to help repay inmates' debts.
So our first news story is about an adorable little kid. He's only 8 years old, but he did something really creative, I must say. So he has written a story that is now being loaned out in libraries for other readers to read. It wasn't officially published. It was something he did on his own. So let's start with a headline. 8-year-old's Christmas story is a hit with readers. When you're describing someone's age and you put their age in front of their name or who they are, a boy or a girl, you want to use those hyphens, 8-year-old's something. So this is an adjective. If you're saying, for example, Mike is 8 years old, don't put hyphens between year, 8, and old. No. Only when it's acting as an adjective. So if you're a hit, you're very popular, and a lot of people like you. So he didn't know how to spell Christmas. So this is an 8-year-old's version of how to spell Christmas.
And his story is a hit with readers. Readers like it. Here's the first paragraph. It says, after devoting 2 years to writing, Idahoan second grader Dylan Helbig snuck his creation about a Christmas adventure onto a library shelf, and people have been borrowing it ever since. Okay, so of course this little boy here, he's in second grade. He's a second grader by the name of Dylan Helbig, and he devoted 2 years of his life to writing. Okay, so I guess he was an aspiring writer. He wants to pursue a career as a writer, so he devoted 2 years to writing. So here we've got the verb to devote, which you could also say to dedicate, which means you commit to something, you give a large part of your time, maybe you give some money to it, you make a great effort, and so he devoted 2 years to writing. He probably didn't do much of anything else, and he wrote this Christmas story. It's a creation, a creative work about a Christmas adventure, and he snuck it onto a library shelf. So here we've got snuck as the past tense of the verb to sneak, which means to do something secretly without people noticing. So he snuck it onto a shelf. You might sneak something into the school, for example. Some kids are bad. They may sneak something into school that's not supposed to be there. But in this particular case, he snuck his book onto a library shelf, and people have been borrowing it ever since. That's what you do in libraries. You borrow books.
You do. Usually you get, I would say 2 to 3 weeks with a book, unless it's really popular, and then you might have a shorter time period and you have to get it back. I was sitting here as I was reading it thinking, wow, I hope nobody borrowed it and then never brought it back.
Could happen, yeah.
That's kind of a little gem, a little jewel. I'm sure his mother wanted it to keep forever, but wow, what a great story. And what an amazing little guy to do this on his own. So he used a lot of time to actually write his story. Devoting. You can devote yourself to a lot of things. He devoted himself or used a lot of his time to produce this Christmas adventure. Now, it's an illustrated book, meaning it has pictures in it. If it's illustrated, it means someone has actually drawn pictures. They're not photographs usually. They're done either by hand or nowadays by computer. There are graphics programs that are used by illustrators nowadays. So it's illustrated, and he's titled it The Adventures of Dylan Helbig's Christmas. And then he signs it as the author by Dylan Helbig himself. A lot of kids, their grammar's not very good when they're young. Actually, a lot of Americans never have good grammar, let's be honest. But a lot of kids, you'll hear them say hisself. They don't know it's himself, which is so cute. And he's written that on the cover by Dylan Helbig hisself. We're using this word scrawled to kind of give you the image of it being kind of messy and it's spread out a longer part of the page. It's not, tiny or typed or really elegant or tidy, scrawled. So he scrawled his name onto the top or the cover of his book. And it says here it's an 81-page hardbound notebook. Hardbound means it has a hard cover. The cover isn't soft. It's not a paperback or even a hard cardboard. It's a little stronger, sturdy. Maybe his mom gave him a journal to write in that has that hard cover on it.
Yeah, and it could be, it could have a hard spine as well. It's not spiral bound like a lot of notebooks are. So maybe it's like a book or a sketchbook or something like that. And it's a story with elements of time travel, fantasy, and historical fiction. Fiction just means they made the story up. It's not true, but it could be based on actual facts. A lot of people they enjoy reading novels, I should say. And novels, of course, are works of fiction. But if it's historical fiction, then it could be a made-up story happening during an actual event. Like you hear people writing stories about things that happened during the American Civil War, for example. Nobody knows if that story really happened, but of course, the Civil War did happen. So that's probably what this is all about. He's writing this story that takes place during an historical event, and it's got time travel in there. It's got fantasy. Maybe there are dragons and damsels in distress or whatever in this story. And wanting to share his story with others, he placed the book on a library shelf with other children's picture books. Hey, what a great idea. If you write a book and you want other people to read it, maybe you can sneak it into the library and sneak it onto a shelf where people will see it and maybe they'll read it. Of course, mean kids will probably break it or tear it up or something like that just because they think they're smart or something. But most other people would probably look at it and think, that looks interesting. Maybe I should read it.
I think he got lucky, though, and it sounds like the library staff found it probably while they were sorting books and replacing books on the bookshelf. They probably thought, well, what's this? It doesn't have, the little number tag on it, and probably thought, oh, this is so adorable. So they probably made it, an official book with a code and a checkout card and everything so that people didn't feel like they could destroy it. Well, what happened was that later, Dylan's mom called the library to ask if the book had been found by anyone. She probably thought, wow, Dylan, where's your book? And he tells his mom, well, I put it on the shelf in the library so someone could check it out. If I was a mom, I would be, no, I want to keep that. But to her astonishment, the library staff had read the book and established or figured out that it complied or followed the rules with their library selection criteria. We use this word astonishment to talk about when someone's really shocked about something. They're really surprised. Oh, my goodness. To her astonishment. You could say she was astonished to discover the library staff had read the book. And if you comply with something, usually we use this verb to talk about people following some sort of rule. Not even so much a law. I would say it's more of a rule. You're following some sort of regulations or rules. If it's a law, I would say, you're obeying the law, you're following the law. But if you comply with something, it means someone's asked you to do something. Maybe in order to go into a particular store, you have to be a member first. Or maybe, there are other little things that people will come up with their rules. And so they determined or they decided that, hey, this follows all of our selection criteria. So we're going to make it part of the library.
Yep, and they began loaning it out like any other book in their collection. So that's what libraries do. They loan books to people, and people borrow books from the library. So know the difference between borrow and lend or loan. I'll loan this to you, or you can borrow it from me. Okay, so that's what happened there, and lots of people have read this book. Hopefully, they made copies of it and other people can read it because I just don't have time to travel to Twin Falls, Idaho, or wherever to go to a library there and check out this book wherever this kid is. Idaho, of course, is a big state. But in any case, yeah, hopefully it has been reprinted in some form. Now, moving on to the next paragraph, it says, earlier this year, Dylan became the first recipient of the Houdini Award for Best Young Novelist, an award devised by the library just for him. So, of course, in the world of literature, there are awards that people can get for producing great books, the Pulitzer Prize, the Booker Award, etc., etc. In this particular case, Dylan won the Houdini Award, and if you win the award, you are the recipient of the award. You receive the award.
We often use it when we're talking about someone who is awarded a prize or some sort of trophy. You can also be an organ transplant recipient, someone who gets a new organ for your body. So he was the first recipient of an award that the library made up just for him, the Houdini Award. This is spelled differently, but Houdini, the sound of that word, is the last name of an escape artist, sort of a really great magician, but he really was focused on escaping from dangerous situations. This was long ago, but they spelled it kind of cute, like who did this and who got away with putting a book in our library. So his book went on to inspire other children to write their own stories, which is really great news for parents out there. We're going to take a quick break. There's no Chinese teacher, but we'll be back to talk about this jail-themed restaurant.
Okay, everybody, let's continue with our lesson for today. We just got done talking about our first story in our Newswatch unit. It's all about the 8-year-old who wrote a Christmas story and snuck it onto the shelf of his local or school library. Now, let's talk about a restaurant where you can go get something to eat, but of course, everybody wants their dining experience to be really special, very unique, and in this particular case, you could actually go to jail eating in a restaurant. Okay, you're not really going to jail, but this is a jail-themed restaurant, a restaurant with a jail theme, and it raises funds to actually help inmates. They're not just trying to make money for themselves by having a restaurant that looks like a jail or a prison. They're actually trying to help people who are in prison because they are in debt.
Yeah, if you're in debt, you owe money that you borrowed, and you're not able to repay that money. You know, every time you use your credit card, that's more debt that you're accumulating or occurring. So, yeah, these guys had this great idea. They're ex-prisoners, so they have been in prison themselves, and they decided to try to help their fellow inmates or former inmates. We only use this word inmate to talk about someone who is in prison or who has been in prison. An ex-con is something that you'll hear in America, especially in movies. Oh, he's an ex-con, ex-convicted man or woman, ex-con. So these guys are from Iran over there in the Middle East, and they have this idea. It is a fun theme. I've never seen a jail-themed restaurant before. They named it Cell 16, so maybe that's where they were held in prison for a long time, Cell 16. The restaurant looks like a jail, complete with jail cells and prison uniforms. Yeah, I bet it could be very fun to decorate this place and to choose uniforms for your waiters, your waitresses. And the restaurant helps raise money for convicts who are stuck in prison for unpaid debts. I was saying to Tom before we started, we used to have debtor's prison long ago, before the 1900s even. But people would be thrown into jail if they couldn't pay their debts. There were no such things as credit cards, of course, back then. But once you were in jail, how were you supposed to earn enough money to pay the debt off to get out of jail. So, unfortunately, a lot of poor people died in prison because they couldn't pay their debts off. So in Iran, sadly, they still have these sorts of situations where people who can't pay their debts are put in prison. The laws are harsh, meaning really tough. On people who write bad checks or can't pay back bank loans. We get a bank loan if we buy a home. We get a bank loan if we buy a car, things like that. Well, if you don't pay that loan back on time, unlike here or in America or most Western countries, they put you in prison if you're in Iran.
Right, so again, we've got two guys who used to be prisoners. They've opened a restaurant. It's called Cell 16. It looks like a jail, and it even has uniforms. Maybe you get to wear those uniforms when you eat, or maybe the waiters wear them.
Yeah.
And, of course, again, we've got the word convict here, people who are in prison who've been convicted of a crime. And, again, laws are harsh on people who write bad checks. People don't really write checks here in Taiwan so much, but in other parts of the world, people still write checks. And I used to work at some place where you always had to be careful about people writing checks because, well, they might not have any funds to back those checks up. And, of course, those people could buy something and then run away. And yes, indeed, people are thrown in jail until the money can be paid back or repaid. So here, the verb to repay just means to give money back to the person who lent it to you. And this was the story of Benjamin Nakat and Arman Alizadeh. I hope I said those names right. They are two men who became friends on their way to jail for unpaid debts. So I guess they met because both of them were borrowing money for things. Maybe they tried to open businesses and their business failed and then they owed a lot of money and they couldn't pay it back. So that's what an unpaid debt is. You owe somebody money, but you just can't pay it back. So they were heading to prison and they met when going to prison, and it was in prison that they hatched the idea to create a jail-themed restaurant. So in prison, of course, it might get kind of boring there, and they decided to think of some ways to make themselves useful when they got out of prison. Hey, what do you want to do when you get out? Well, I don't know. I guess I'll go back and take care of my mother or something. Hey, let's go into business together. Let's actually make a restaurant with a jail theme. We could actually make some money.
I think that beyond making some money for themselves, they really were thinking about their inmates who were stuck in prison with no way to make money to repay a debt. So they really came at this with this idea to help others in need. So it's kind of a charitable sort of organization, as well as being a place where you can go get some food. And I'm sure they use the money they earn to pay for their living as well. But here it says they hatched the idea. We use this word hatch, an idea. That's a whole phrase, to hatch an idea, hatch a plan. Because when little baby chickens are ready to come out of their shells, we actually use the verb they hatch. You know, the eggs hatched. So they hatched the idea. They had this new idea that was just springing open just at the start of it. And they hatched the idea to create a jail-themed restaurant. They have launched campaigns to raise funds for inmates drowning in debt. If you really want to emphasize the fact that you are overwhelmed by something, you could be drowning in work, drowning in emails. Sometimes I feel like the emails don't stop. Drowning in debt, you have so much debt, you feel like you're drowning in it. You'll never be able to get out of debt or even get some air. So they were trying to launch campaigns to raise funds, just to raise some money to help those inmates who were still stuck in prison.
Exactly. So they wanted to come up with some money, not only to, make the business profitable, but also to help out those people in prison. And as you said, Stephanie, you're not really doing any good being in prison if you're in debt. How the heck can you pay back that loan? And how can the people that you owe the money to get money also?
Exactly.
Exactly. So, yes, these people should be out trying to find the money. And a part of the restaurant's proceeds, or the money that they make, make is also used to help set prisoners free. So I guess they lend the money to prisoners to let them get out of prison, and maybe eventually when they, get back on their feet again, they can pay back those loans.
They may just give it to them.
It could be possible
they
as
just
well.
Give them the money, yeah.
Exactly, and they have their own criteria for choosing who gets priority, such as men with wives and families. So there are probably lots of people in prison because they owe money, but there are probably too many people in prison for them to help. So they have this criteria. They have these rules set up in how they choose who gets picked first, who gets priority. Who do we give the money to first? Well, we give it to men who have wives and families. That's pretty important. If they're single men, well, maybe they can be lower in priority. We'll help them out someday, but we'll first help out these people who actually have families that are suffering because, hey, the breadwinner is in the slammer. He's in jail.
Yeah, that's slang for jail, slammer. He's in the slammer. Yeah, I think that's a great idea to have criteria. You have standards that you go by in order to select the right people. I think it's right to give men with wives and kids priority. They go to the front of the line, you could say. So thanks in part to word of mouth on social media, the restaurant's been a great success. They really have been. They've already donated tons of money. 130 million US. Wow, that's a lot of money. Now, when you do something or something is spread by word of mouth, it just means people talk to their friends. They talk to their coworkers. They talk to people that they know about something. That's called free advertising. That's the best type of advertising you can do because you don't have to pay any money. So all they did was got on social media, talked about it, and probably encouraged people to share a particular post. And they got a lot of people who were then willing to go to the restaurant. And, that's how they made some of this money. That's a lot of money to donate.
It's a lot, and of course this restaurant is in Iran, so you'd have to travel to Iran to check out this restaurant, but of course it's becoming widely known about. We're talking about it here.
Hey, we're in Taiwan. Yeah,
indeed. So
they're getting lots of publicity, aren't they?
Absolutely. So, of course, people may hear about this, and, of course, people do travel to Iran, and they might think about checking this place out. So don't worry, the staff there probably knows some English, maybe even some Chinese, of course. And yes, indeed, word is spreading. It's spreading due to word of mouth on social media. It's been a great success, and it donated lots of money to help repay the debts of those inmates, so they are doing better. And, the next question is, what the heck do they serve there? Do they serve prison food? That might give people a good experience as to what prison is all about.
They would not make any money that way, Tom.
Probably not. But maybe they do offer that fare. Like, here's a typical prison meal, some slop on a tray that is totally unappetizing.
Gross.
And it will probably make you have diarrhea after you eat it or something like that. But, again, that's probably not a good way for them to stay in business. They better offer some decent food.
They sure should. Well, that brings us to the end of our News Watch. We hope you enjoyed this. We know we didn't have any Chinese teacher today, but no problem for our listeners. This is a great way, though, to test your level, is to listen to an all-English program and see if you've made any progress. We hope you have. Thanks for joining us for English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Bye.